A fire on USS Gerald R. Ford did not just sideline a $13 billion carrier. It forced Washington to answer a Hormuz crisis with 4,400 Marines, 2 amphibious assault ships, and a harder combat model built for islands, mines, and staying power. USS Gerald R. Ford, the most expensive warship ever built, suffered a blaze in the laundry facility after more than 260 days of non-stop operations and roughly 9 months without a scheduled maintenance port call. The fire burned for 30 hours. Hundreds of sailors were treated for smoke inhalation. Ford had to withdraw to Suda Bay for repairs, and carrier air cover in the Red Sea suddenly dropped out of the picture at the worst possible moment. That gap was visible immediately. Epic fury had already pushed the region into a live contest over shipping lanes, missile coverage, and mine approaches. Ford was supposed to anchor pressure across the wider theater while USS Tripoli moved toward the Strait of Hormuz with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, a 44,000-ton America-class hull, and 20 F-35Bs built to fight from the air. Once Ford came off the line, the operating question changed. Washington no longer needed the most symbolic answer. It needed the fastest answer that could still seize ground, protect lanes, and hold positions after the first strike package passed. Iran had spent 40 years building the corridor into a trap. The United States had just lost its cleanest maritime symbol to heat, smoke, and maintenance strain. The contrast sharpened the whole crisis. A carrier leaving the board did not reduce the danger in Hormuz. It compressed the timeline for every decision that followed and forced the next phase of the campaign into a narrower, more brutal shape. Ford's withdrawal also changed perception. In the Gulf and the Red Sea, crews, insurers, commanders, and regional governments recalculate range, response time, and political risk the moment a flagship leaves the board. The next American move had to do more than fill a gap on paper. It had to restore the sense that Washington could still impose order inside the tightest stretch of the crisis. The clean replacement for a damaged carrier would have been another carrier, but the fleet did not offer one on the timeline this crisis demanded. The United States Navy operates 11 nuclear-powered supercarriers, yet availability had tightened to the point that nearly half the hulls were unavailable at any given time. Lincoln was committed to the Arabian Sea. Truman was headed into a 4-1-2-year nuclear refueling overhaul. Eisenhower had just come off an unusually long deployment. Other ships were tied to maintenance cycles, workups, or distance. The Red Sea gap had opened, but the classic answer was not ready to move. Washington responded with the force that was ready to move. 7 days after the Ford fire, USS Boxer, LHD-4, was pushed forward by 3 weeks. Boxer was a 40,000-ton Wasp-class amphibious assault ship carrying the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit. Its arrival changed the force package immediately. Tripoli alone brought roughly 2,200 Marines and an aviation-heavy platform moving toward Hormuz. Tripoli and Boxer together doubled that strength to 4,400 Marines and turned a single air-focused deployment into a 2-ship amphibious team with aviation, ship-to-shore lift, screening boats, and the internal capacity needed for a serious landing operation. The shift was more important than the headline. Tripoli and Boxer were not mirrors. Tripoli was the pocket carrier, a platform built around air power and fast vertical insertion. Boxer carried only 6 F-35Bs, but it brought the feature Tripoli had deliberately sacrificed: a full well deck. In a narrow waterway lined with islands, minefields, missile sites, and short reaction windows that mattered more than prestige. Washington was no longer trying to recreate Ford. It was building a force that could clear, land, reinforce, and stay. In Hormuz, that is a more dangerous answer than simply replacing one deck with another. The pressure inside the Pentagon was practical, not theoretical. Another carrier would have offered reach and symbolism, but symbolism was not the immediate shortage. The shortage was usable force that could arrive on time and operate inside a cluttered maritime battle space. Boxer answered that shortage. It brought lift, internal volume, boats, Marines, and the kind of amphibious flexibility that becomes decisive when the fight is likely to move from open water to shorelines, causeways, and small islands under missile observation. 3 fortified islands sit inside the geometry of the strait: Abu Musa, Greater Tumb, and Lesser Tumb. Iran seized them in 1971 and spent 5 decades turning them into fixed military positions with anti-ship missile batteries, coastal radar arrays, artillery sites, and IRGC garrisons. After 2 weeks of epic Fury air strikes, even a few surviving launchers on those islands could still threaten every ship trying to cross the corridor. That made the islands the first battlefield, not a side objective. Tripoli could strike that problem from above. Marines moving by MV-22 Ospreys and CH-53 helicopters could fly over mined water and land directly on commanding ground. Radar sites, observation posts, and missile crews could be hit before a conventional landing ever reached shore. Speed favored that approach, but air assault alone could not finish the job. Helicopters and tiltrotors can place infantry where the defender is weak. They do not deliver the weight needed to hold an island once the first wave is on the ground and the defender starts pushing back. Boxer supplied the missing mass. Its well deck, 266 feet long and 50 feet wide, could launch 3 LCAC hovercraft at over 40 knots carrying M1 Abrams tanks, armored vehicles, ammunition, fuel, and engineering equipment. A conventional landing craft, moving at 10 knots through 5 nautical miles of mined water, would face 30 minutes of exposure. An LCAC could cross the same distance in about 7.5 minutes while riding 7 feet above the water on an air cushion instead of dragging a hole through pressure-activated mines. That difference turned a defensive moat into a timing problem. Marines arriving from the air and armored loads arriving from the sea forced Iranian defenders to split their attention, their fires, and their reaction speed at the exact point where the corridor was narrowest. The islands also carried political weight beyond their physical size. As long as Abu Musa, Greater Tumb, and Lesser Tumb remained armed, Iran could argue that the corridor was still under its immediate gaze and fire control. Breaking those positions would tear a hole in Tehran's claim to local dominance at the exact place where geography did most of the work for the defender. Neutralizing the islands would not reopen the route by itself. The water around Hormuz remained a live battlefield. The original operational picture still holds. Roughly 300 square nautical miles could be seeded with naval mines, and mine countermeasure ships would have to work slowly, visibly, and under observation. LCS mine warfare packages brought useful tools into that fight, including airborne laser detection systems, unmanned surface vessels, towing sonar, and underwater drones. None of those systems mattered much if Iran could still track the sweepers, harass them with drones, or rush them with 5-0, not fast boats armed with Nasser 1 anti-ship missiles. Tripoli and Boxers solved that exposure by building a shield around the sweepers. Tripoli pushed the roof overhead. Its F-35Bs extended air cover across the operating box while helicopters and sensors searched for launch points, mobile teams, and moving contacts. Boxer built the walls on the surface. From its boat spaces and deck capacity, it could move rigid hull, inflatable boats, and patrol craft into a close screen around the mine clearance group. AH-1 Zulu Viper attack helicopters then filled the short-range gap, hunting fast boats and breaking up attacks with Hellfire missiles before they could close distance. That protective geometry changed the pace of the campaign. Mine warfare is slow by nature, but slow does not have to mean helpless. Once the sweepers worked inside a defended bubble, the corridor stopped looking like an open target range and started looking like an engineering task under guard. That distinction is decisive in commercial war zones. Tankers do not return because officials announce confidence. They return when crews, insurers, and operators can see that lanes are being cleared under force protection and kept open long enough to trust the transit picture again. Once that shield was in place, the campaign could move from survival to tempo. One side tried to keep the corridor dangerous enough to freeze movement. The other tried to make danger manageable long enough for traffic to resume. Boxers, Vipers, Sweepers, and F-35Bs would not remove risk from the strait. They would reduce risk to a level the market could live with, and that is how maritime pressure begins to fail. Seizing an island takes a day. Holding an island takes weeks. That line carries the real weight of the campaign. The Marine Corps concept for the next stage is Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations, or EABO, dispersed shore positions with launchers, radar, and forward arming and refueling points that extend sea control from land. In Hormuz, That idea only works if the force ashore can be fed after the first landing. A spectacular assault that cannot be sustained becomes a raid. A sustained outpost becomes a firing problem Tehran has to solve every hour it remains in place. Tripoli could support those outposts for a limited period, but not at the scale needed for persistence. An MV-22 Osprey can carry up to 20,000 pounds at maximum load. At the combat ranges relevant for Hormuz resupply, effective payload drops to around 8,000 pounds per sortie. That is enough for ammunition, food, medical supplies, batteries, and some light spare parts. It is not enough for bulk fuel, heavy generators, replacement vehicles, engineering stores, or HIMARS reload pallets. A force sustained only by Osprey stays sharp and mobile, but it remains light, temporary, and vulnerable to interruption. Boxer changed the math. One LCAC could carry over 60 tons, roughly 120,000 pounds, in a single run. That equals about 15 Osprey sorties at combat range. Boxer carried 3 LCACs. At 3 trips per day per craft, that becomes 9 runs moving 540 tons of supplies daily to forward positions. Matching that by air alone would require 135 Osprey sorties every day, a tempo no commander would treat as a durable foundation for an island campaign. This is where the well deck stops being a technical feature and becomes the backbone of the operation. Fuel bladders, reload pallets, spare parts, repair teams, generators, and heavy ammunition loads all move through that system. If that flow holds, Marines do not just arrive on the islands. They stay there, arm there, refuel there, and turn those positions into persistent pressure points over the strait. The strategic consequence is larger than tonnage. Logistics determines whether a force becomes a headline or a lasting problem. An outpost that eats through its ammunition and fuel becomes a rescue mission waiting to happen. An outpost that receives steady loads of missiles, repair parts, water, batteries, communications, equipment, and armored support becomes a fixed source of pressure on every Iranian movement around it. Sustainment is what turns initial shock into staying power, and staying power is what makes a maritime campaign hurt beyond the first week. By this stage, the pieces stop operating as separate answers and lock into one system. Marines seize island, ground, and Iranian missile launchers on that ground go dark. Observation posts lose sightlines over minesweeper movements. Mine countermeasure ships work closer to the corridor inside a defended bubble. Cleared lanes support the logistics shuttle. The logistics shuttle sustains EABO positions. Those positions then protect the corridor and project control from land that cannot be sunk. Each step feeds the next one. The numbers make that system harder to dismiss. Between Tripoli and Boxer, the United States could field 26 F-35Bs without pushing a supercarrier deep into the Gulf. With 4,400 Marines ashore or staged forward, plus HIMARS, radar arrays, refueling points, and constant resupply, the entire width of the strait could come under pressure from fixed positions instead of temporary patrol patterns. Iran spent 40 years fortifying Hormuz against ships, mine-sweeping lanes, and tanker traffic. This package attacked the corridor from a different angle. It was built for islands, for mined approaches, for short distances, and for persistence after contact. That is why the strongest conclusion should remain blunt. The fire on Ford looked like a setback because it removed a $13 billion symbol from the fight. In operational terms, it pushed Washington toward a more distributed and more durable model of control. A single carrier projects power. A 2-ship marine package, backed by shore positions, can seize space, clear routes, and keep pressure in place after the first exchange of fire. In the Strait of Hormuz, that is the more dangerous form of pressure because it is harder to predict, harder to suppress, and harder to reverse once it is established. Tehran would still retain tools. Mine clearance can take weeks. Small boats can keep probing. Surviving launchers can still create damage. EABO at this scale would push Marines into a punishing test of endurance, tempo, and precision. None of that weakens the core conclusion. It strengthens it. A campaign becomes more dangerous when the force structure on one side is better matched to the battle space than the defender expected.